Requiem for Njeri is a deeply moving book of poetry written and published by Waithira Mbuthia Protano as a tribute to her daughter. Njeri suffered from mental illness and took her own life. Along with the book of poetry is a musical adaptation composed by psychologist and organist George Groth. Kenyan-born Waithira is an English teacher, lecturer, essayist, and storyteller, but she now devotes most of her energy to raising consciousness about mental illness and dispelling misunderstandings about this awful disease. Waithira Mbuthia Protano is my guest today. I'm Alice Bloom. This is A Town and Village Too. Welcome back. Waithira, thank you so much for being my guest. I know that you've got a wonderful story to tell, a sad story to tell, but that what you're doing about it is pretty remarkable. Tell me a little bit about Njeri. When did she die?
Njeri passed on in 2004.
Okay, and how old was she?
She had just turned 27.
Okay, young woman. And how long had she been struggling with mental illness?
She was diagnosed in about 2000.
In 2000,
Yeah.
so it's not very long.
No.
So she was a young adult when she was diagnosed. Is that common for someone to have lived most of her life without a problem and then develop one?
What happens is that bipolar is very hard to diagnose. That's one of the problems. Because one looks back, in hindsight and thinks of certain things. I think back when she was 13, there was an incident, but there was only one, which they say with bipolar you can have just one incident, and then many years later things will happen. But basically, the illness, they say the onset is often in the early 20s.
I see.
Yeah, 2022.
Is that an inherited characteristic? Were there other episodes of bipolar in your family?
Actually, it can be inherited. It can be, like anything else, any other disease that affects the body. It can come from the family, but I don't know of any bipolar disease in my family.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how did doctors react? I mean, when she was 13, you said there was an episode. Did you report it to her physician?
The reason you see me hesitate is because it's an incredibly painful. Njeri and my son, the older one, are from my first marriage. And Njeri had attempted suicide
When she was 13.
And she was told not to say anything, and the father totally denied it at the hospital, told her what not to say to the nurses. And that is a part of the story that I don't, that I'm not so ready to talk about right now, but because there are some things that go with that, and I'm not trying not to be open about it. Just let's say that there was a lot of secrecy, and that the child who had already tried to hurt herself was very much told not to tell the doctors what was happening. So it was,
Well, I'm interested in not so much, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I've been reading about this, and I read an article recently, actually, about exactly that, that people who've attempted suicide are told not to talk about it. And
not by me, though. Me, I was very, very, very open, and I was ready. There is nothing that I couldn't go out with, couldn't tell doctors to try and save my child.
But do you think, is just talking about an attempt, is it because it makes people so uncomfortable?
Well, think about it. Suicide is a true taboo, just like mental illnesses. Mm-hmm. And when you have fear and ignorance mixed together, they are a very bad combination. They are a evil combination. Mm-hmm. When you think about it, there is nothing more frightening than losing one's mind. Really, there cannot be. I remember my daughter just being frightened because people who have mental problems, they do know. And I remember sometimes she would be so frightened. And one day, she just sat at the dining table, and she looked straight as I was begging her to take her medication, because that's one of the hardest things to get patients to do. And tears were just streaming down her face. And she said to me, and I'll never forget, "Mommy, why am I suffering so much? I haven't done anything."
Of course.
And
well, why? What I'm trying to understand is that we do accept that mental illness is a disease.
No, we don't. That's the thing. We do not. And this is exactly what I would love for people, why the reason why I am so passionate about coming out and talking to people. Because think about it. Our head is another organ like any in the body, and hence susceptible to disease.
But why do you think there's such resistance to accepting mental illness as disease?
Because the society makes it difficult for people to accept it. It is taboo. It is, do not talk about that. We don't go crazy. Look at the words that are used to describe people who are who have mental illnesses, not a mental ill, but have mental illness. You will be called crazy, nut, some derogatory words. If you're crazy, you are deranged, you will make no sense, you're a non-person. And so, who wants to be associated with crazy? Did you see that, not to get off the topic, but Hemingway's daughter, Mario Hemingway, she had this documentary that is running from crazy. Of course, she uses that as a provocative word.
Is there a feeling do people feel like you should be able to control yourself?
That is in fact, I'm glad you say that. Just like addiction, people sometimes feel, why? If you want to get well, why don't you take medication? You are being offered help, first of all. Why can't you take medication? You can control yourself. You can control your moods. What is this? Are you being lazy? And that's another thing. It's another chapter of my daughter where, certain someone would just overload her with college work. And I'm just concerned, my husband and I are concerned with her getting better. And a person who does not have faculties about her cannot be able to function. And I look back now, and bipolar, you are up when you're cycling, you're the most energetic person on earth. She was a tiny little thing, and she could be a dynamo and very happy, brilliant girl, like many people with mental illness sometimes are, very bright, very creative. And she would crash completely in
Could you
depression.
sense an episode coming on?
I could sometimes. And with her, if I may just go back when it began, we were in Mamaroneck, and she came out and she said that she was here. There are people in the house. She has to go tell me something in the hallway. Because there were people in the house, and I looked at her like, what are you talking about, first of all? Do you understand?
Were there people in the house?
Had never,
or she
was
just
hearing voices.
I see.
That's how it first came. But now I probably digress from your question because I have so much. You said, could I know when the episode was coming on? Sometimes I could.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes
and if
I
you could see it coming on, was it often attributed to her stopping her medication or some other environmental factor?
Oh, speaking of, sometimes, of course, it's medication. And that's what usually cures people with bipolar, often with bipolar. Because actually, if you take medication, if you can be with doctors, sensitive doctors, long enough, I was told by my doctor, if a person with bipolar can go up to age 30, chances are they will live. Before that, it's almost impossible.
Why does a person stop taking the medication?
Oh, for
Help
many
me
reasons.
understand.
For many reasons. Many people, again, who suffer from mental illness are very creative people. And the medication often dulls the creativity. Not only that, but while the doctors are finding the correct dosage, you can sometimes be given too much to a point of where you are just, practically all these medications, they cause weight gain.
And a young woman would be
In
upset
a
about that.
young woman,
Right.
and in a Western culture, okay? Lack of energy, so there is lethargy, there is gaining of weight, there is lack of, the creativity that really they live for. And all these factors. And the fact that, you are taking medication, the other very big thing is that they take the medication and then they start feeling better.
Okay.
And they think that they don't have to. Now, one of the biggest danger, and this is why education is so important, of stopping the medication. It's like the way you would get antibiotics. They are prescribed for a certain up to, you have to take them
Take it
for
for 5
7,
days
10,
or
whatever
whatever they
the
tell you,
case.
right.
That if you don't, the illness will come doubly hard. Precisely the same thing with bipolar. When you stop taking medication, the illness comes back with a vengeance.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm still stuck on, I can't get past the fact that someone who has attempted suicide is not allowed to talk about it. When I've read that the best predictor of suicide is a previous attempt. So it would be like a red flag. I mean, someone who doctors need to know.
What about doctors? How about doctors following up with that child, especially when even the child before they are 18? Because there is then the other factor. When they get to 18, you have no control of whether they take the medication or not. There are several things, by the way, that affect the healing of the child or the person that the loved ones are caring for. And one of them, again, is what we just discussed, the factors we just went through, the society's stigma, the shame and stigma. And then what do you call it? The people who who pay for the insurance companies, of course. Because it doesn't matter how actually secure 2 weeks are over, they are going to get rid of the person unless
in other words, if you've been hospitalized.
If you have been hospitalized. The other factor, of course, if you are 18, it doesn't matter. And
did you have difficulty communicating with your daughter's doctors because she was over 18?
Yes.
So they won't talk to you unless she gives you a release.
Yeah, and a couple of them they were just downright arrogant. If I had had the strength, because for a long, long, long time I couldn't quite, if it wasn't for my husband, I don't know how I would have functioned. If it wasn't for that and another one factor of not wanting to ever deal with certain people, there were people who would have had huge lawsuits. A doctor, a psychologist supposedly, whom I called before my daughter hurt her son, And I remember walking all around my mind. This is very hard, difficult for me to talk about, so please bear with me. And I'm walking with a cell phone and begging this doctor. I know, a mother knows. My daughter will kill herself unless you absolutely help me. She will kill herself. This doctor told me, what are you talking about? I have documented all this. What are you talking about? She's fine. She just came here and she's fine. This is a psychologist? This is supposed to be a psychiatrist. I had those dismiss me. There's another doctor who told my daughter, if you refuse to take medication, you ever come here again, I will ship you upstate and you will never be seen again. That haunted my daughter, so that once when we were able with my daughter, my husband, we had been in the city. You asked me whether I can sense, and she was just...
You knew she was not right.
Yes, she was talking very fast. She was totally cycling, they call it. And we tricked her to taking her to the medical center in White Plains, where she had been before. My daughter escaped. It was winter. She had like a little shirt on. Escaped, ran to her father in the city. And there's a lot to say about that.
Yeah, so she didn't have the support. I read recently...
Nothing. There was no support with a certain doctor or psychiatrist, or sometimes even a caseworker. They were all like, she's an adult, there's nothing I can do. Once my husband and we went and camped. You see, we tried also to keep her with us, so that I can supervise her.
But it's hard to supervise a young adult.
So long as she was such an obedient girl, by the way, And one of the things that, please, let me just say this, that really hurts me is when I see crimes committed and on television, and people automatically go to, mentally sick. Sometimes maybe some people have morals, or they're just bad. They don't have, because when, in fact, they say only 5% of population who suffer from mental illness are aggressive. Usually they direct the hurting. They hurt themselves more than others. So Njeri was a very obedient young girl. She never ever sassed to me. She never would. So she was very nice, but
I've read about an initiative in California that might interest you, and I wondered if there's anything similar here. And it was a joint initiative started by a pastor in, of all places, an evangelical church in California, where they found very similar reaction to people with mental illness as what you described. And they're now trying to train the clergy as well as the administrators in the church, because they find that people with mental challenges often feel most at home in church, or that they're comfortable there and they'll seek help there where they might avoid doctors or psychiatrists. And that if people at that level are trained to at least identify someone who might be at risk, they can intervene. They could perhaps work with that person to then get the proper help that they need.
Except, in that way, everybody ought to come on board. I don't care, churches, synagogues, any community
any kind of,
everybody should honestly come on board for this, because anybody who thinks that it's my daughter or somebody else's daughter, this is a very pervasive disease, as we are finding out.
How many people are affected by bipolar disease?
Now you got me, and I actually have statistics. I think it's in the vicinity. I know it's in the millions, in America anyway. And I think it's like 5 million. I don't want to say it.
People?
Oh, yeah.
I know that there are about 1 million people a year attempt suicide.
And probably even more.
And not that all of those are mentally ill.
Yeah.
And that something like 38,000 people actually succeed.
The problem is totally pervasive. It's like, I keep on saying that I liken it. You know how you buy a dress, especially as a woman, or you buy a new car. You never saw it before. As soon as you
Right.
buy it, you start seeing it everywhere.
Oh, sure.
Because I mean, it's really almost the same
Well,
thing
that's
with
called,
mental
actually,
illness.
that's called the cocktail effect.
Yeah, cocktail effect. But the thing is, that's when you, of course, have been touched by that.
Sure.
Of course, you are very aware. But let me go back to the church. Church can be a good thing, but also people who suffer from mental illness, say bipolar or schizophrenia, they tend also to be very, and that's, by the way, I guess, of identifying. One of the ways
tend
that
to be what?
very religious, they would become, they
often
would
are.
develop,
Right.
very quickly,
Okay.
of a zealousness in religion. Okay, and I have seen that almost, honestly, without any exception.
But
In
does,
fact, my
but does
daughter,
the religion offer some solace to them or some peace?
Of course, I mean, and everything, because I remember my daughter, let me just say this. My daughter told me, because my daughter was the funniest person. Maybe you saw what I say about her.
Sure.
And seriously, she was so funny and so much fun. And she was so cute and adorable. I loved her to pieces, because she really was a lovable. And even if she wasn't right, everybody loved her. And what happened is that she told me she could make actually fun of this. You know, and one day she told me, Mom, I went to church, and and she made really fun of this. She said, I went to church, and I felt very religious, and all these people thought I had been saved, and they started, saying prayer for me. I grew up in church. I was raised as a Christian.
Where
but
did you grow up? Where are you
I
from?
grew up in Kenya.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did Njeri ever live there?
Jerry used to travel there, and talk about trigger. Trouble is a trigger.
Interesting. Well, probably
Travel.
any transition, wouldn't that?
Any kind of transition, any kind of trauma.
Trauma being breaking up with your boyfriend or getting a bad grade in school?
Or big, abuse of any kind can be a trigger if you have a
Does someone
dormant-
who's that sensitive perceive abuse differently than other people? What I mean is that some people I know seem to react much more dramatically to a small downturn.
Sure.
You get a bad grade, you fail a
Yes,
test,
right,
you lose your
right.
purse.
They
I mean, things
feel
that are upsetting,
deeper.
but
I would tend to think they feel more deeply
yes.
because, they would feel more deeply.
Is
And
that one of the things that makes people less tolerant of a person with bipolar? Do you feel like saying, or did you ever find yourself saying, oh, get over it, it's just not that big a deal, you'll get past it?
Honestly, never.
You never
I'll
did.
tell you what I used to do. Being unrealistic, I used to bribe her. I would attempt bribing her. If you can take the medication for a year, I'll give you $2,000-3,000 cash. I'll take you to Italy. We did not want to travel to Italy without her. She ended up never going, but that's one of the things I would promise
Well, I think
her.
any good parent would, you resort to whatever you have. If that's
I
the
would,
carrot.
but I would get impatient. You got to take medication.
Yes.
Of course, there is frustration.
Well, you're dealing with an adult child,
Yes,
and we all know that you
exactly,
can't control that.
exactly.
What's been the reaction to your book of poetry, which is very deeply moving, Requiem for Njeri?
Really great reaction. People who have come up to me after presentation, people who have come up to me, written to me, especially after the launch, which was really well attended. People texted me, they emailed me, and I have some of my comments on and some people came to me, and a couple, I must say, shocked me. A couple, because they're people I knew. One of them is a person I knew well, and that was very, very happy. Naturally, I would never, of course, say who it was, but it's somebody who had actually written. I might as well, in fact, I did save a life, because it's someone who had already written a suicide note. And so there are several people I am in contact with, and I have to mention about the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the NAMI, because I never had any opportunity. I know, and I hope someone I have in mind is watching this. I know a person who is very afraid of anybody finding out about the daughter being ill. We both know. And I have told that person, and I need to say this because I hope nothing ever happens to this beautiful child, that if I knew about organizations like NAMI or any other similar places where I could go for comfort, for help, for information. Because since the diagnosis, after diagnosis, I learned, well, first of all, I was self-taught. I went insane looking for information.
I just want to stop you for a
yes.
second. So it means that none of the doctors who knew
None.
that she was struggling from this now diagnosed disease and had attempted suicide, nobody put you in touch with
no one, which is shocking, which is shocking, especially being in Westchester. No one told me, here is some information. I never saw it at the hospital on the table. No one. Isn't it shocking?
Tell me this.
Yeah.
Why is it different to lose a loved one to suicide? Why is it different than losing them to another illness?
Isn't that a great question? That is a question that society has to answer, because for the longest of time, this took a lot of courage to come out like this, even, and I'm still, because if I had lost my Njeri through cancer, through kidney failure, I would have had people come to support me. I would have talked freely. But I lost my daughter, and I don't like to say, I'm very careful, I don't like to say my daughter committed suicide. That is putting the onus of death on my daughter. The illness, bipolar, caused my daughter to die, just like cancer would cause a patient to die.
I understand. So what you're saying is that most people don't appreciate mental illness as a disease.
No, they don't.
Njeri, what do you hope will come from your book?
What
I have only a minute left.
Yes. What I hope really will come from
Njeri's
Requiem
book
for Njeri is awareness for society to treat mental illness like any other disease that affects our bodies. This is an organ, part of our body, that happens to be susceptible to an illness.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know this is not easy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's really my pleasure to have you here, not under these circumstances, but I know that this will affect many other people and perhaps help them.
I just hope so.
But I wish you great healing for you and your family.
Much.
To everyone at home, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.